Our protagonist, Lin Xingchen, is a high school boy who has suffered from bad luck for most of his life. His classmates discriminated against him for having a reputation for attracting misfortune to those who approach him, which led him to master the incredible ability of reflection, and thus avoid all forms of danger. For our protagonist, one day he is possessed by a demonic lute because of the situation as of the same coincidence. However, the curse of bad luck is so much even for the devil himself. To survive, the demonic lute has no choice but to teach our protagonist to change the course of the wheel of destiny for his own sake. Interesting, right? Well, the story begins on a fairly ordinary day, entering school. There, every uncontrollable factor that existed was classified as luck, but unable to accept the fact that you cannot control everything. Humans tried to give value to an image to attract luck. There, thanks to that, so arose some of the symbols of fortune such as cranes, koi fish, and other symbols. While the students of such a school saw how the statue of the principal had a new crack, and thanks to that they realized that a boy, or rather, our protagonist returned again to school. The symbol of misfortune incarnate for the people in general was called the Lord of the Catastrophe. As soon as they saw Xingchen, every general student in their school began to go crazy. They didn't understand how he, who was in the hospital thanks to a car accident, could be back, on both legs intact. Instantly, all those students started screaming all over the courtyard that they had to get away from him right then and there because his bad luck was too contagious. There was a boy who had tripped right in front of our protagonist, and when he realized that, the boy yelled at him to spare his life since he was only a high school student and had never done anything wrong to him, besides helping the old ladies cross the street whenever he could. Just after finishing that ridiculous speech, Xingchen gave him a death look, to which the boy shouted at him with all the air in his lungs not to curse him with his bad luck. Another boy, fallen from the sky, making a fool of himself, besides calling Xingchen an evildoer, shouted at him, while he had a wooden cane spinning in his hands quickly, that it didn't matter if Xingchen had martial arts or learned sports in his possession. He and 3 other boys were experts in all those things, besides calling themselves the best students of that place, and they illuminated that mediocre world. They were the battalion of gifted students. Xingchen, unable to believe it, couldn't get a word out of his mouth. The battalion of gifted students let him know that he would not spread the seed of misfortune in that school again. They added that they would not let Xingchen get away with it as long as that battalion was present. That said, their leader ordered them to end their lives so that they would be much more than heroes at that school. Xingchen, already losing his patience, yelled at them to stop bothering him as he was going to be late for his first class. Without expecting it, they were the battalion of gifted students. They felt a brilliance and such magnitude of strength of bad luck that it left them all on the floor, kneeling, telling each other that Xingchen had cursed everyone with his bad luck, using only a roar. Unfortunately for Xingchen, what he had done was not enough since one of the battalion of gifted students shouted at him not to feel victorious since he could not govern the school solely because he had defeated the battalion of gifted students in one move since no one and his wife would be on his side. In addition, Xingchen could never extinguish the embers of justice that the battalion of gifted students gave. Xingchen, our protagonist, called him crazy and went on his way. Our protagonist believed himself to be the symbol of misfortune, so given that he didn't bother when all the students at school called him the Lord of Catastrophe. As our Catastrophe Lord walked to class, the boys inside his classroom talked about trivialities, but as soon as the doorbell rang together as Xingchen arrived, they were all silent. Other students, the most brazen, began to murmur and stare at him. Some were stunned as our disaster lord could stand after a car accident, while other students were astonished to learn that their recovery in the hospital had only lasted a week. Another group of not-so-large students were commenting behind their backs that the driver who drove that car was in a coma, while another of his friends had heard that the driver had died instantly. But that was to be expected from the Lord of the Catastrophe because if someone got close enough to him, bad luck would immediately invade him. Our Lord of Catastrophe continued walking to his desk without paying much attention to them. He didn't even decide to pay attention to them when the students in the back rows ran to not even cross his path. Once seated at his private table, he began to talk to himself. And it is that all the rumors that ran around him accusing him of attracting his bad luck, or that if he looked at them or even touched them he cursed them with her were pure lies. They were pure stupidities. Our Lord of Catastrophe did not cause bad luck. Did everyone say that he cursed them with the infinite misfortune of life? It was rubbish. The only one with bad luck there was Xingchen. He was the one who had had an accident that had come out of nowhere and suddenly ended up in the hospital. After all, no one else in that school had suffered any misfortune because of him. On the contrary, everyone made fun of it. because our Lord of the Catastrophe was already very unlucky, and thanks to that they called him the symbol of misfortune. All the students of the school had a reason and objective to make fun of him, even those who did not seek to mock him. His way of acting for not standing out from the others made it quite obvious, while others commented that they had to buy themselves a talisman to ward off their bad luck. In almost all circumstances like this, all superstitious and stupid creatures tended to fall into a state of panic very quickly. Our Catastrophe Lord had basically been excluded, making not a single person in the entire school approach him. Well, no one inside or outside the school approached him, and there was no exception. Even a girl who was sitting next to Xingchen was trembling like a leaf, and she hadn't looked up from her table. Xingchen was thinking that if she was so afraid to be sitting there, why not leave with her group of friends better? He understood why. After a rather irritating blonde girl yelled at the shaky girl like the leaf, they were waiting for her to hit our Lord of Catastrophe because she had to protect the whole class. If she didn't, she was going to be excluded from the group. Although later they explained that it was a lie. But if she sat there took too long, she would catch her bad luck, and they would not accept her if she became the Queen of Catastrophe. Xingchen, quite annoyed, realized that they had found someone else to take advantage of during his absence from the hospital. They had more fun bothering that girl than an unresponsive target like our Catastrophe Lord. But he still thought that, since she was a girl, he felt a little sorry for such a thing. But it was also none of his mind, since he had his own problems and had no time to worry about others. The girl who trembled like a leaf was hurried again to give that ridiculous blow. Xingchen was surprised that she got up from her seat so he could face him, but he still didn't mind asking her if he would really do what that stupid group asked. The girl told him that she wanted to stay in that group, so she apologized and hit him so hard that our Catastrophe Lord fell from his seat. But, unfortunately for the girl, that was nothing Xingchen could not handle. He took a couple of turns, causing the students to look at him with their mouths quite open. Xingchen told them that they meant nothing to him and weren't even worth it. I'm sure I was going to tell you a few more things, but our protagonist slipped thanks to a banana peel, causing it to crash against the window. It broke into 1,000 pieces while falling through it. His classmates started screaming in surprise that Xingchen could fall out of the window. There was even one who, leaning out the window and with a crucifix, begged our Lord of the Catastrophe not to torment them for that, since the culprit of that fall had been the banana shell and not them. On the other hand, while our Catastrophe Lord was falling, he was thinking that his real problem had finally arrived, for no matter how infinitesimal the development had been, he always ended up in the worst possible outcome. The unexpected turns of events put him in constant danger, no matter what situation. To him, Lin Xingchen, also known as our Catastrophe Lord, that was not a weakness, since he was the man guarded by the catastrophe. Thinking that, our Lord of the Catastrophe opened an umbrella that he had on his back to soften his fall, since he had fought against bad luck for 10 years and was always attentive to any danger that crossed him. In addition, he could train his body and mind to the maximum. Our Lord of Catastrophe opened his umbrella, turned it over, and managed to fall into the leaves of a tree, thinking that he would not lose again against misfortune. Without much search, our Catastrophe Lord was able to land safely. Not so safe, given that on his landing he destroyed the statue of the school. When he was taken to the directorate, the chairman of the board told him that he had to pay 700 yuan to repair the sculpture of the director. In addition, he added the compensation for the broken glass and damaged trees gave him a total of 850 yuan. The chairman of the council also told him that what he had said earlier was the indemnity account, so he asked if he had any objections. Our Catastrophe Lord threw his hands at the desk and shouted that he clearly had a problem. How on earth the chairman of the council wanted him to pay 700 yuan for a stupid piece of stone? They just had to give him some superglue and he was going to fix it without any problem. The president of the council let him know that he was ignorant in the arts and that this was too unacceptable. He further pointed out that even one of the 6 PVC figures finished at that time cost at least more than 700 yuan, and that any prototype cost even more than the final product. So, there was no doubt that the statue of the director was an invaluable prototype. The president of the council let our protagonist know that the confiscated items inside were the soul and effort of the sculptor of his school. However, our Lord of the Catastrophe had destroyed the sculpture and had insulted the soul of the sculptor. But even so, the school had decided not to impose any severe administrative sanction on our protagonist, so the lightest punishment they could offer him was compensation of 700 yuan. Our Lord of the Catastrophe let him be because he could not do anything more to prevent such absurd compensation. However, the president of the council told him that was not all, since they had to move on to the main topic. As soon as he said that, our protagonist asked him what the hell he was talking about. The president wasted no time telling him he hoped he could leave school for an entire year. Xingchen asked him the reason for the decision, to which the president took a whole scroll of the rules that our Lord of the Catastrophe had broken since he had enrolled no more and nothing less than 2 months ago. Xingchen looked with absolute terror at such a scroll, but the president did not pay the slightest attention to it and began to name the broken rules by our Catastrophe Lord. Mainly it was the absences, too many late arrivals, early returns, destruction of school property, disturbance of order, dangerous behaviors, and a few more. But the school president was more concerned about all that rumors that were spreading that our Lord of the Catastrophe gave bad luck among the first-year students. The president let him know that Xingchen caused panic and disruption to all the students in the school, to which Xingchen replied that why he blamed him for that also if he had done absolutely nothing, since the students were the ones who, since they had nothing to do, invented such stupid rumors. The president did not believe him one bit, so he let him know that for whatever reason, Xingchen was at the center of the rumors, and therefore if Xingchen disappeared, the rumors would too. Xingchen didn't believe the absurd solution he had come up with, so he told him. The president began to tell him that there was no way to put an end to the silly rumors in an instant, since the longer it dragged on, the more people would be affected, and everyone on the student council was too busy at the time to face even more chaos. He again asked our Catastrophe Lord to leave school for a year and wait for the silly rumors to disappear, so when he came back, there would be new people around him and they would not discriminate against him. Wasn't that a solution that would benefit them all equally? Our Lord of Catastrophe congratulated him on all that he had said, but he also let him know that he had no reason to please incompetent people. The student council president gave him a death look, but told him that there was nothing more to talk about. Moreover, he told him that he had 2 weeks. The president would give our disaster lord 2 weeks and get him out cleanly. As Xingchen turned his back on him, he pulled out his umbrella on his back and expressed with the utmost emotion that he accepted his challenge. The boy, without thinking, had declared war on the highest authority of the school against the whole school. What raise? In the next chapter, he shows us our Catastrophe Lord sipping a soda while thinking the people on the student council were bastards. He crushed his soda can as soon as he finished drinking it to shout what was the ridiculousness of being the center of those rumors, that they were going to fry asparagus, and that everything was nonsense, and lies on everyone's part. As soon as he threw the can with full force, it bounced against the recycling bin, and from there to his head. Our Catastrophe Lord, by pulling out her middle finger, let the can of her soda know that it was only a can, and he didn't know how she dared to be so conceited. So if she wanted to challenge him, I better prove that she was more interesting. At this moment, a bird dropped its number 2 need, causing our Catastrophe Lord to look at the bird with a look of death. He decided to open his umbrella quickly and did not accept the gift of that bird. He managed to dodge it by doing a small somersault. Once he thought that he was safe and sound, he put his umbrella back on his back. For seconds later, notice what he had done and say stupid for having put the number 2 need of the bird in the backpack. Because yes, it turns out that the umbrella he took out of his back was tucked into his backpack. Moving on to the next scene, we find a lot of people accumulated in a space, observing some scene. 2 guys out of that pile of people wondered what that fuss was, to which one of them replied that it was about something about a pretty weird guy trying to catch a bird. In that, the bird passes near the guys and not much behind that bird. This our Lord of the Catastrophe with his umbrella in his hands, with the lost look of a psychopath, shouting that night he would dine on bird meat. Running, people cleared the place, letting our Lord of the Catastrophe pass. The bird managed to cross a building, and when he thought that our protagonist had lost his trail, he appeared, thinking that this bird could not flee from him. To the very bad luck of our Catastrophe Lord, as soon as he crossed over to continue hunting that bird, a chef, all his knives he had just bought had slipped from his plump hands, and before they disfigured Xingchen's face, the boy by sheer luck opened his umbrella in time, thus avoiding the attack of those knives. The chef observed that scene and lamented aloud that his knives were all going to be dull. As soon as our Lord of the Catastrophe could be saved by pure chance, another man warned that his inflatable doll had flown out, and that he had just bought it. Xingchen did not hesitate to close his umbrella so he could prick that doll. The owner of that doll shouted in disapproval. Xingchen didn't care in the slightest. Without waiting for any further interruptions, our Catastrophe Lord continued to run, letting the stupid bird know that his time had come, since no matter what happened, his bad luck would not stand in his way and cut off all who opposed him to the front. Having said that, our Lord of the Catastrophe collided with someone, but still did not waste time shouting at him if he did not see where he was walking. The person, who was apparently an old woman, answered her cry with another, letting him know that it had been our Catastrophe Lord who had stumbled upon her. The old woman took advantage of the fact that people were beginning to surround that scene to tell our Lord of the Catastrophe that his whole body hurt. Therefore he had to pay his medical bills. When our protagonist knelt in front of the old woman, the lady told him that kneeling in front of her would be of no use to him. When she said that, our Catastrophe Lord bowed, making the old lady tell him why he was bowing. On the third move Xingchen made, he ran out leaving the old lady very upset, and the crowd in complete silence. The old lady shouted at him breathlessly that karma would return for our Catastrophe Lord, since he had messed with Liu Bangxian, and that now he must abide by the consequences, plus the gods would punish him. The crowd, seeing that she had faked her pains, began to disperse, leaving the crazy old woman screaming alone. The mad old woman also let him know that our Lord of Catastrophe would be cursed with bad luck for his whole life, and that he would never taste the taste of peace. At least, not as long as she was alive. Our Catastrophe Lord, as he kept running, thought about what was wrong with his bad luck. He was already quite used to it. The people who knew him, as our protagonist passed by, began to wonder what the hell he was doing outside of class, because if he was around, he should not plot anything good. When our Catastrophe Lord returned to school, he heard rather tormenting laughter coming out of his classroom. They were the girls of a while ago, those who had forced the girl with leaf tremors to beat him. They were messing with the girl leaf tremors to eat a special spiral-shaped mayonnaise. They were basically forcing her to eat that thing quickly. The girl let them know that she had already complied with what she had been ordered, to which the stressful blonde told her that if she believed that this was why she had already gotten rid of them. While our Catastrophe Lord thought that they didn't get tired of getting in and making fun of other people, the tormenting girls were mockingly saying that they were going to make another mayonnaise mask. As soon as they were going to start the mayonnaise mask surely on the girl's head, our Lord of Catastrophe grabbed just in time the arm of the blonde, letting her know that they had crossed the line. The blonde was quite confused, but she still managed to get her arm out of that deadly grip in which Xingchen had it. When she told him he had scared her, he noticed who he really was. As soon as he noticed that it was Xingchen, he told him that it was very frowned upon to assault girls, but changed the subject by congratulating him on his show earlier as it had been quite entertaining. She began to tease that Xingchen, with only her umbrella, managed to end up on top of a tree. Just like a monkey, she and her partner started laughing tormently, but since Xingchen didn't care in the least about her teasing, the blonde told her that she shouldn't care what was happening in a group of friends. She took the opportunity to tell the girl trembling as the leaf that they were really her friends, words that took the girl by surprise, thus managing not to say anything. Our Lord of the Catastrophe, seeing that the girl said absolutely nothing, turned around, telling the witches that he advised them to lower their voice, and that everything else did not matter to him. The blonde's partner, on the orders of her friend, kicked to tell our Lord of the Catastrophe that who was believed to be to give them orders, but for his bad luck, his foot was on the tip of the umbrella of our protagonist, puncturing it in the process. The girl immediately went to the floor, complaining that her foot hurt incredibly much. The blonde immediately came to her aid, and as soon as she took off her shoe to see how big her friend's wound had been, there was only a small puncture and a small blood stain on her sock. Our Lord of the Catastrophe, while his companions shouted many hurtful things at him, he immediately realized that this was not his umbrella. Its umbrella could never hurt a person with its tip alone since it was not sharp. Moments later, the teacher in charge of the classroom was announcing to his entire class that they were going to tell the way in which they would approach the case of our Lord of the Catastrophe. And although Shasha, who was the one Xingchen had hurt with his umbrella, had suffered minor superficial injuries, it was being considered that since the situation was extremely serious, he should suppose the immediate suspension. But the mission of that school was to develop those with a unique specialty area, so all those who passed through those classrooms had the power to be particularly skilled in a certain area. The professor added that in order not to waste the opportunities of any of those students, the principal and the student council had decided to give Xingchen one more chance. As long as our Lord of the Catastrophe reconsidered and he himself met the requirements to obtain the title of gifted student, just like that he would not be suspended. As always, our Lord of the Catastrophe was not listening at all, and thanks to himself, his teacher, after shouting at him if he had heard anything he said while he had a book on his face and feet mounted on his table, let him know that he had 2 weeks to avoid that suspension. His classmates, when the teacher announced that time, inevitably began to murmur that our Lord of Catastrophe could not achieve anything in the determined time, since deep down there was not even any talent to achieve that title. Xingchen removed the book from his face and settled into his seat when he understood that those 2 weeks had been put on by the president of the student council. Without caring, he let the class know that those ridiculous 2 weeks were not necessary, since he would make sure that he never forgot Xingchen. because he was going to achieve that silly title by the time school ended that same day. By the time the school day ended, all the students at school were leaving with a smile on their faces, until our Lord of the Catastrophe appeared, thinking that if people were distracted for a moment, bad luck would appear on the prowl. And, let's see, the word unfortunate did not express even 1% of what our Lord of the Catastrophe has had to go through. Over the past 10 years, countless unfortunate encounters and endless dangerous incidents have occurred around him that no one had ever gone through, that caused our Catastrophe Lord's senses to become incredibly sensitive. Accident, incident, disaster. Our Lord of Catastrophe was more than aware of all the possibilities he faced. And, as for human actions, there were the evil intentions. One of Xingqian's classmates, in the middle of the day, decided to throw a bat at the head of our Lord of Catastrophe. He was able to dodge the bat, but of course, as they did not stop there, another companion, while our protagonist was concentrated on dodging that bat, managed to remove his umbrella from his backpack and ran away. Our Lord of Catastrophe immediately went in search of him, shouting that for no reason he was going to let that orange-headed boy escape. The orange-headed boy kept running until he was at a dead end. Our Lord of the Catastrophe let him know with a comment well loaded with sarcasm and an insult aside. He also let her know that if the orange-headed boy gave him back his umbrella, perhaps he would spare his useless life. When he finished saying that, a much older boy, apparently a senior in school, approached from behind with a metal tube in his hand. Our Lord of the Catastrophe realized that, and the orange-headed boy, in addition to telling him that they already had him surrounded, made it clear to the boy, who apparently was his brother, to finish him. As the orange-headed boy's brother began to make sounds with the metal pipe on the wall of the dead end, Xingqian asked him what the hell they intended with him. The boy replied that they intended to teach him a lesson, and Xingqian, with a face of boredom, told them both that they were garbage. The orange-headed boy was very upset, so he raised Xingqian's umbrella high so he could hit him well. It didn't even take long for our protagonist to kick him in that boy's stomach and tell his brother that he was next. Although he seemed to be a little afraid of Xingqian, he ran over with his tube in his hand. But Xingqian took his umbrella from the floor with his foot, and having it in his hand, he managed to get the tube out of the boy's hand without needing much. In doing that, the boy asked him if he thought he was going to lose there since he was an outstanding student in the field of boxing. While the fight continued, in the next scene we are shown the girl Leaf Tremors running down the stairs, thinking that she had to hurry since things with Xingqian were like this because of her. Plus she had to do something. She quickly found the place where those boys were supposed to be fighting because the blows were heard through a window. So as she arrived, our Catastrophe Lord was repeatedly punching his opponent with incredible speed. The guy was thinking that our Catastrophe Lord was quite strong for his age, but what he didn't expect was that the leaf-shaking girl would come, open the window slammed, scream for everyone to stop, making the window frame knock out our protagonist. Once on the floor, the giant guy was puzzled, but still turned his eyes to the girl to give her a look of death. That girl, seeing him, ran out of there without looking back. Our Catastrophe Lord slowly got up as the girl ran out. He realized that he was quite dizzy and his vision was weird. As soon as he was wondering if he had really hit his head, the guy's foot crushed his chest. The orange-headed boy's brother called him to be his turn to strike our Lord of Catastrophe. The boy was going to do it, until he stood still as soon as he saw the blonde companion quite tormenting, telling our Lord of the Catastrophe that he was a real fighter, although he was looking at him with the look given to him by a defeated opponent. They beat him. They beat our protagonist a lot, so much so that even the tormenting blonde had to interrupt the blows to say that she was not a little irrational person, which I differ quite a bit about. So if he apologized to her and her friend Shasha in front of all the students the next day in the morning, I would let him go. The orange-headed boy told him that it was quite pathetic for Maki, who was the name of the tormenting blonde, to offer him a way out, but that even so, he had to thank her as quickly as he could. Our Catastrophe Lord didn't stoop down, so he let Maki know that he was nothing more than scum. Maki gave him a look of death, but he wasted no time in getting up and quickly taking Xingqian's umbrella from his backpack. She asked him if it was with that same umbrella that he hurt his best friend. Surely Xingqian was not going to answer, so we jumped to another scene where the old lady was present. That was the old lady Xingqian had fought that very day, and she was yelling at someone to take his hands off somewhere. Then, we could see who shouted that at him. He was his disciple. He was touching the same umbrella of Xingqian, and then told the old woman that he almost killed him from fright and that he had cut his index finger cutting some vegetables. Also asked her if she could not be nicer with him. The old woman replied that for that very reason she did not want him to touch that umbrella. His disciple pulled him in the face that this was just a ramshackle umbrella, to which that old woman hit his head and told him that he knew nothing about life. He let him know that that umbrella was haunted with centuries of stories called pipa. In addition to the evil in that umbrella was giant, and that it had claimed many lives throughout its centuries. His ancestors tried very hard to seal it. But if the umbrella was stained with the blood of a man and a young woman, the seal would destroy, and perhaps, thanks to its destruction, something worse would appear. That lady, crushing the finger that had been cut off to his disciple, demanded that he stay away from that umbrella. He also noted that she intended to purify the umbrella to fulfill what the ancestors had failed to conclude, so that his reputation would grow, and wealth and fortune would come to his door like spurts. His disciple, after thinking that this old woman would never change, looked at the umbrella more closely, and thought that its excessively stiff fabric and metal structure were very modern details, so they should have scammed her again. Returning to the scene of our catastrophe lord, Maki, the tormenting blonde, hit him with her umbrella in the face, causing the giant guy to warn him not to hit him in the face because if the injuries were very obvious they were going to have a very bad time. The girl, quite annoyed, ignored him quite a bit. He continued with our Lord of Catastrophe telling him that no one wanted to approach him, besides that he was not even able to entertain others. She was also upset that the school had given her half a month to be with them, and yes, she let her know too. Mankey looked at him very badly and told him that he was very disgusting. However, he returned to his height, taking out a small mirror to hit him in the face and tell him to look at his reflection. As soon as our catastrophe lord did, Mankey told him that he had no pride and was a poor useless garbage. With that said, he got up again, handed the umbrella to the giant senior guy, and ordered him to use the tip of that umbrella to make a mark where it could not be seen. As soon as the giant guy had the umbrella in his possession, Mankey started walking away from all of them, towards the exit, but not before thanking the guy with his hand. By the time she left, the senior gentleman, as the tip of the umbrella went in the direction of our catastrophe lord, told her that he had sought him out. Already the tip near him, our Lord of Catastrophe managed to dodge it, using his hand to stop the blow of the umbrella. Xingchen, quite angry, began to say that if misfortune had not pursued him, he would have finished with the two of them from the beginning. If he had not been unlucky, they would not have suspended him, and if he had not been so unlucky. The orange-headed boy yelled at him that those bad luck things were childish and wouldn't work with them. That said, they resumed their blows. Kicks in the face, kicks in the chest, in the legs, blows and more blows. If our catastrophe lord were not so unlucky, different things would have happened. But anger, shame and rejection were the emotions so intense that they transformed into a giant beast with horns and a rather pointed tail. His anger burned the earth, his claws decimated everything that came his way, and he instilled fear among the countless tiny enemies. Fear twisted their faces, and all they had left to do was scream from the pain. However, for Xingchen, such a beast did not exist, since all he felt was only a condensed drop of the overflowing emotions that had awakened the umbrella. Out of nowhere, the umbrella with which they were beating Xingchen suddenly opened, causing the orange-headed boy to ask his elder brother why he had opened such a thing, to which he replied that it had not been his fault and that thing had opened itself. Our catastrophe lord noticed what had happened and felt when an evil spirit came out of the umbrella saying he was going to consume him. Xingchen was surprised to see that purple and evil spirit come out of his small umbrella so he could stand in front of his face and repeat that he was going to consume it. That said, such a spirit was introduced through his eyes and mouth, leaving our protagonist unable to speak, breathe or see. The orange-headed boy and his brother were a little frightened, but the elder brother told him to continue to watch him, and if something bad happened to him, they would run away. On the other hand, if Xingchen was faking his attack, they were going to continue to beat him mercilessly, since after all, no one was going to that place, so it was pretty safe. For Xingchen, at first, everything around him had turned black, but what happened next was an intense feeling of shortness of breath. It was as if he was drowning. He couldn't even think. While our catastrophe lord felt that, the evil spirit let him know that he wanted to consume his soul, take over his body, take away everything he possessed, and thus descend into his pathetic world once again. That voice continued to flood our Lord's consciousness of the catastrophe. Meanwhile, deep down, the evil spirit continued to speak to him, asking him if what was happening hurt. He explained that this happened when a body tried to welcome two souls, since at that moment, their souls were connected, and so our catastrophe lord could hear all their thoughts, while the evil spirit could feel all their pain. But, according to the spirit, all that was going to end very soon, and so he would consume him and become his new owner of his body. But before that, laughing, the spirit demanded of our Lord of Catastrophe to beg him, and perhaps then he would hasten with his suffering. That said, the spirit fitted some of its claws into vital parts of our Catastrophe Lord's body so that every part of his soul could be extracted faster and faster. However, our protagonist, among all his sweat, let the spirit know that it was too early to start talking about pleading. Thanks to that, the spirit was surprised by his persistence, and told him that such persistence of his soul was not bad at all. It seemed to the spirit that our Catastrophe Lord had gone through some hardships throughout his life, but although he really wanted to dig into his memories, their souls had already begun to merge into one, so he told Xingchen that he must consume him at that precise moment. The spirit brought Xingchen's body closer to his giant mouth and then stopped near giving him the first bite. Opening his eyes, astonished, he pulled Xingchen away from his oral cavity and told him that he was a giant whirlwind of bad luck. He did not believe it possible. That is, he thought that how was it possible that someone with such an amount of bad luck in his body was still alive? If he were to consume it, all that bad luck would fall on himself, but unfortunately they could no longer separate. It didn't take long for the spirit to start breaking out in a cold sweat when it began to feel Xingchen's bad luck climbing up his body. He compared our Lord of Catastrophe to poison. He shouted that this man's soul was a deadly poison. Our Lord of Catastrophe, with a rather sarcastic smile, asked the spirit if perhaps those of his class were also afraid of bad luck. The spirit thought that there was no time to speak since, at least, he had to get rid of that bad luck that had managed to stagnate in his body. When he came out of the body of our Lord of Catastrophe, he saw the two fools and thought that just touching their souls would be more than enough to be saved. But, to his bad luck, he could not reach them since his soul could not advance. The spirit could not leave the body of our Lord of Catastrophe because his bad luck invaded him more and more. Desperate, he told himself that if he got rid of 70% of his body, maybe he could infect the boys who were so close. Then changed his mind, telling himself that with 80% of his soul undone he could be more effective. But as soon as he tried, bad luck began to condense throughout his body. That spirit fought tooth and nail, until finally he managed to get rid of the body of our protagonist. Once his explosion of parts was done, the orange-headed boy and his elder brother suddenly felt a very creepy cold. But as soon as they saw Xingchen get up from the ground breathing alteredly, the elder brother said that Xingchen was fine after all, so he took the umbrella from the ground again and approached Xingchen to tell him that the time had come for his end. In that, we move on to another scene where a girl knocked on the door of the student council president's office. Once the girl was allowed in, she handed over everything that had been confiscated from class that day. Apparently, the president did not like that toy, so he sent it away. The girl, unable to believe it, asked him if they were really not going to keep that object in the drawer of confiscated objects, to which the president said that this toy did not fit with his refined tastes. The girl, without saying a word, left that office, and as she walked down the hall, she talked to herself, saying that it was more than obvious that the president wanted to keep every object he confiscated, and also pointed out that all the work in the student council made less and less sense. The girl threw the toy out of the nearest window, bringing us back to the scene of Xingchen. The boy was on his knees, thinking that if that evil spirit had really disappeared, while the older brother of the orange-headed boy asked him to get up so he could lick his own wounds. Xingchen, annoyed, could not believe that those guys were still there, because if another wave of bad luck reached him, it would be his downfall. That said, the toy began to reach its position, and the perception that our Lord of the Catastrophe had unconsciously developed to avoid dangerous situations appeared, making him think that he had loaded that toy with all his bad luck. The elder brother of the orange-headed boy demanded of him, while trying to stick the tip of his umbrella somewhere on his body, to tell him how it was possible for our Catastrophe Lord to continue seeking help. But before our Catastrophe Lord could even speak, the toy and a separate brick fell on the heads of both stupid people, leaving the unconscious and the other trembling from having seen their own blood, asking for the ambulance to be called. Our protagonist, seeing that, mentally told himself that the one with bad luck was supposed to be him, to which the evil spirit that when appearing had not managed to get out of him, asked him to go get the umbrella. Our Catastrophe Lord immediately understood what had happened, so he stood up and said that he would make them pay first. He walked towards his two beaters with intense desire to kill them. So when the older brother of the orange-headed boy asked him to wait a moment to negotiate as gentleman, since he was quite injured, and that if what he wanted was his umbrella he would without thinking return it immediately, he completely ignored it, and a nice fist stamped on his face. Xingchen let him know that he would pick up his umbrella himself, while the boy's older brother flew out because of the accurate blow Xingchen had given him to shatter that face. Once that was done, he picked up his umbrella and told the evil spirit that dwelt in it that it was time for them to have a frank conversation, adding what the remaining 20% Lord wanted from him. That evil spirit hanging from the umbrella turned into a small purple ball and told him to allow him to introduce himself. His name was Pipa and he was a great evil spirit. Possibly he would have said more in his presentation if our Lord of the Catastrophe had not burst him several times on the ground. Pipa repeatedly asked him to stop, and what our Catastrophe Lord said is that if he asked him for mercy, maybe he would let him die without pain. Pipa thought he was really too spiteful, but he still let a couple of pleas out of his mouth. As soon as our Lord of Catastrophe stopped his blows, Pipa let him know that anyway their souls were now united and could no longer be separated. Even that they even shared the bad luck of our Lord of Catastrophe, but that in a portion from 1 to 9, Pipa had the number 1, while our Lord of Catastrophe had the number 9. Xingchen, irritated, told him that he had not even dared to take half, to which Pipa ignored him and told him to make sure that he was never more than 5 meters away from him or else his life would end soon. Or that's what he tried to tell him since he jumped into Xingchen's heart. Xingchen, the only thing he felt when Pipa did such a thing was his slightly heavy chest. As for Pipa, since he was very weakened by his state, he was suffocating inside the body of our Lord of Catastrophe. When that little purple ball was able to come out of the chest, he immediately asked our Lord for forgiveness of the catastrophe, besides that he would never lie to him in such a way again. Our Lord of the Catastrophe let him know that he felt and perceived the pain of the small purple ball, to which Pipa replied to forgive him since he had been very arrogant. Our Catastrophe Lord, letting him pass, asked him what would happen to himself after their souls connect. Pipa replied that not much would happen, an answer that did not please our Lord of the Catastrophe at all because he was more than ready to throw that umbrella far, far away from him. Pipa, seeing that, yelled at him to really believe him, since they were now in the same situation, so if he suffered any injuries, he would also receive the damage. Our Catastrophe Lord, after having been mired in misfortune for a long time and encountering all kinds of incredible crises, he would no longer even be surprised if one day he met some demon from beyond and died. All that boiled down to his bad luck. That was the firm belief of our Catastrophe Lord. He believed that until people let go, desperately, that he could help him get rid of his bad luck. Our Catastrophe Lord, who reacted to nothing except his bad luck, reacted to those words. He grabbed the little purple ball with his hands and as he squeezed it, asked him if he could really do such a thing. The little purple ball replied that there was no problem since, to tell the truth, it was the first time he saw such formidable bad luck. The purple ball also let him know that he didn't know what our Catastrophe Lord had done to attract her, but if he were a normal person, quite a long time ago, literally quite a long time ago, he would have stretched his paw. But luckily for our Catastrophe Lord, he seemed to be much more resilient than some ordinary human, even stronger than the little purple ball, who was an extremely evil spirit. Pipa told him that if they could count on the resistance of our Lord of the Catastrophe, they would have time to find some objective to which to transfer that bad luck so that they could escape that fate of misfortune, and that they could even control luck. To which our Lord of the Catastrophe said, very seriously, that no one, seriously, no one could control luck. Pipa told him that if he said it was more than perfect. Even so, the little purple ball asked him if they tried to control the world better, but our Lord of Catastrophe replied to close his beak. As I told him that, our Lord of Catastrophe thought that he now had a new question to consider, and that was whether the little purple ball had arrived at his side to help him fight his bad luck, or whether his arrival and everything that had happened so far was also a consequence of misfortune itself. He had a little time to think about that question, until in the end he gave him exactly the same thing, since the only thing that our Lord of the Catastrophe wanted now was to give a show of bad luck to those who had beaten him and, perhaps, to all his companions. There the flames of vengeance were lit to our Lord of the Catastrophe. The next day, we found the scene that our Lord of the Catastrophe was waiting for the traffic light to change color so that our protagonist, next to his small purple ball of evil, began to walk. His little purple ball of evil was more than surprised by the gigantic constructions, the swift metal coffins, which were actually the buses, and the moving images, which were actually advertising posters. Pipa was telling our Lord of Catastrophe that the world after a few centuries was impressive and had truly surpassed his imagination. Our Lord of the Catastrophe, irritated, blurted out that at first he had thought that his little purple ball of evil was only an umbrella, but it turned out that in the end it was only a purple ball. Pipa, screaming, denied being any of the two things that our Lord of the Catastrophe had said, since being a ball of purple evil was only black jade. I see it purple, which was only a mirror that reflected its magnificent shape. Besides that he only lives in the umbrella for a while, that was it. Xingchen sarcastically told his little purple ball of evil, aka black jade, that if they wanted to transfer the bad luck to someone else, Having to touch the target's body was going to be a bit impractical. The little purple ball shouted to our Lord of Catastrophe that his name was Peepa. Moreover, after calming down, he told him that today's young people were quite impatient. He explained that it was very difficult to deal with bad luck, even more so if he was at 20% of his capacity, but that even if he had all his power he could not transfer that bad luck against his will. Moreover, the little purple ball of evil told him that he should thank his lucky stars that his bad luck could even be transferred. He repeated that he should be grateful for everything sacred to him because his bad luck was horrible. Our Catastrophe Lord completely ignored him, and when at last the blessed traffic light changed to the green light, he began to walk as it was a principle of our Catastrophe Lord. He always had to comply with traffic rules, even if they were tedious enough for himself to even comply with them. Before he even crossed the street, his little purple ball of evil demanded that he not continue walking since he wanted to continue observing more of those portraits that moved. That is, the screens with advertising running through them. Our Lord of the Catastrophe was annoyed when he realized that in the rope that his little purple ball of evil was icing, he could stretch, thus being able to move it at the whim of that purple ball. He also became stressed about Peepa, with whom he currently lived and completely ignored traffic rules. Peepa, however, let him know that he could not transfer his bad luck without his help, so they were inseparable. Our Catastrophe Lord mockingly asked him if he wanted to drown again. As our Catastrophe Lord was waiting for his answer, he didn't notice when a car was about to hit him if his horn didn't sound. The car was able to brake and our Disaster Lord was able to reach the sidewalk before the story was worse, but he did not do it by his own means. The little purple ball of evil asked him if he was really going to let him get hit by a car. Our Lord of the Catastrophe was astonished, causing his little purple ball of evil to advise him not to get nervous since the day before he had transferred a part of his bad luck, so at least they should arrive at noon, safe and sound. And all that was thanks to his magnificent skill. Xingchen was quite surprised, so much so that he didn't swallow that it was true. His little purple ball told him that in time he would get used to it, and then he could continue to transfer and transfer and transfer and transfer his bad luck, so humans would live in panic and chaos. Xingchen, while finally being able to cross the street quietly, asked his talking purple ball to lower his voice. His little purple ball of evil was not listening to him at all, so he kept talking until Xingchen began to spin it non-stop, telling him to speak lower a second time. Peepa yelled to stop several times. Possibly Xingchen stopped doing evil to his little purple ball of evil since we are sent to another scene where they are at the entrance of their school. As soon as our Disaster Lord arrived there, the students began to murmur that he no longer had a dark cloud over him. When the little purple ball of evil went even deeper into the school, in the statue of the principal was the orange-headed boy shouting someone who was rubbish, because they had left his older brother lying on the floor. The students around him said that no one had done anything, to which the orange-headed boy replied that these were pure excuses and that no one dared to say stupid to his older brother. He kept demanding answers while banging on the statue of the director, until in one of those, the head of the statue broke and fell on the head of the orange child, leaving him unconscious on the floor. The students who were surrounding him, while some were asking for an ambulance, others were saying that his head fell because it was a sign from beyond. The little purple ball of evil told our protagonist that apparently the orange boy's streak of bad luck was still ongoing. While the little purple ball of evil waited for an answer from our Lord of the Catastrophe, the boy ran until he reached the sporting goods store where he locked himself looking quite dizzy. His little purple ball of very confused evil let him know that there was no one there, so why had he locked himself there? He did not continue talking because our Lord of the Catastrophe began to laugh like a lunatic. Literally, he laughed and laughed and laughed so much that even he himself did not know because he had begun to laugh that way. But he laughed and laughed until he was hoarse. And the funniest thing is that while I was in the sporting goods warehouse, no one, seriously, no one dared to approach there. Our Catastrophe Lord continued to laugh so much that he couldn't hold back his laughter when the warehouse door opened, letting the girl see Leaf Tremors asking for permission as she had to take some things from there to the gym. Our Disaster Lord was finally able to compose himself so well that he helped the girl carry the instruments she needed to take out of the warehouse for the gym. The people, as soon as they saw them together, began to murmur. They did not last long because our Lord of the Catastrophe gave them a look of death, causing everyone to flee from there. As soon as he did that, she thanked him. Our Lord of the Catastrophe took advantage of the fact that they continued walking and in silence to ask her if she was not afraid that he would infect her with his bad luck. She, all shy and pretty, replied that she knew that was not true. Xingchen, to change the subject, asked her breathlessly why she had to carry all those things by herself. The girl, who at first did not know how to answer that, minutes later told him that her evil friend, Shasha, had a pain in her leg that day, so she asked him to help her. Xingchen, annoyed, asked to know why she did everything that pair of vipers ordered. She shut up while blushing. Both passed by the soccer field, listening to how those who were in it played and asked for the passes. After a while, she replied that for some reason, when she was in high school everyone ignored her as well as our Catastrophe Lord, but Maki and his group arrived. They were in her class and told her that if she complied with his stupid orders, no one would ever exclude her again. Our Catastrophe Lord understood her point, and hated the vipers for attacking her at her weakest point. But when he was going to answer her, a ball was about to land in his face. Luckily, he dodged it with the box of sports equipment, yelling at the players to look at where they were pointing. However, once the ball was dodged, he left a mess in his way. The girl, in a hurry, told him that she picked them up. While she was doing it, she asked our Lord of the Catastrophe to leave her there since at that rate it would only get him into more trouble. According to her, she could still bear all things as they were for the time being. Xingchen, without leaving her, thought about how naive she was since in the social circle where she was at that time, those vipers were going to continue to test their limits just for fun. They would keep laughing at his weakness until they could break his spirit. While the girl told our Lord of the Catastrophe that everything was ready, and they could leave, he kept thinking that nothing that happened to that girl was his business. But what did interest him was that throw over the shoulder that had made him break the window and pay for a stupid statue of directives. That movement had been very fast and clean, plus it was executed in a second. Was that a coincidence or the result of years of much practice? Thinking about that, our Lord of the Catastrophe decided to check it for himself, so he raised his fist, and as soon as the girl saw him sideways, she took his arm and raised it above her head, repeating that movement once more. That proved our Lord of the Catastrophe right, since he himself knew that it had not been any coincidence, but he still wanted to prove it. He told himself that she was super strong, until a basketball was stamped on the girl's face. When our Catastrophe Lord saw her again, the girl was on the floor. Some boys who were playing basketball, when they saw that their ball had fallen in the girl's face, began to approach, until they saw our protagonist there. Although some of them yelled at the girl that she was okay, others didn't want to get much closer. The little purple ball of evil of our Lord of the Catastrophe decided to appear, saying that if she had received a ball it was because of the bad luck that he had transferred to her. Although that was only a hint of bad luck compared to the other two who were beating up our Catastrophe Lord that day. Xingchen, between annoyed and nervous, took his little purple ball of evil in his hands, squeezing him, and asked him what he was talking about. The little purple thing replied that the day before he had sacrificed 80% of his body to transfer the bad luck of our Catastrophe Lord to 3 people who were quite close to him. Our Lord of the Catastrophe immediately could not believe it, while the little purple ball of evil accepted that yes, that was what had happened. And it is that the day before, when our Lord of the Catastrophe was fighting with the 2 dumb guys, the girl was hiding in the room behind him. And besides, she had received most of the bad luck, so worse situations should come into her life than a ball in her face. The little purple ball of evil also told him that this was a good opportunity to observe the results of a bad luck transfer, something that our Catastrophe Lord completely ignored while in his head he thought about what he had to do. The girl was on the ground, apparently fainted from the ball in her face, and while our Disaster Lord thought about what he had to do, he heard the boys who were playing with the ball that should leave the couple alone since our protagonist was fighting with her. So from then on, they had nothing to do with that matter. Our Catastrophe Lord, ignoring them as always, came to the point where his head gave him the idea that he had to take her to the infirmary, and while he was doing that, we were thrown into another scene. In it we find a boy of the same class as that of our very small Catastrophe Lord, and that while he entered classes, there were bets where the boys bet 10 or 20 yuan that they expelled our Lord from the Catastrophe, while another said that the payment was 8 to 1 that our Catastrophe Lord got the status of the gifted student. The boy, who was the class representative, was carrying some sheets to the teacher's desk when one of his classmates told him that he was arriving just in time and also asked him if he wanted to bet with them. Liu Xing, who was what the class representative was called, told him not to count on him, and suggested to everyone that they try to go unnoticed those days and not to make any fuss since the evaluation for the elite classes would begin very soon. That evaluation was an important credit to his class, so none of his classmates, should take it lightly. The boys began to laugh, telling the class representative that it was all a joke, that he needed to relax, and that he was too tense for his own good, and that no one would like him. The representative of the class, apparently, liked very badly what they said because he let them know that despite not supporting our Lord of the Catastrophe at all, who in himself was hated by all, He had managed to maintain his own impeccable and respected image. He also blurted out that they, mere mortals, could never even imagine how advanced their strategies were. The betters had his speech fried asparagus, although they agreed with him to get the title of elite class. That said, the whole class supported the silly boy with applause and shouts of happiness. The only one who thought that was too pathetic was our favorite Viper Maki. She was dedicated to looking at her cell phone by the window. And just as he took his eyes off his technological device, he could observe how our Catastrophe Lord had the girlfriend of the Witch of Maki on his back. He possibly said something, but we jumped into the scene where our Catastrophe Lord was thinking of recovering his bad luck from the girl he had on his back. The little purple ball of evil that was flying through his head stopped immediately and faced our Lord of the Catastrophe with a resounding and painful no. Also added that he withdraw what he had just said, and did not think to do such stupidity. Our Lord of the Catastrophe gave a look of death to his little purple ball and then told him that he had never asked for a little of his opinion. The little purple ball of evil made it very clear to him that our Lord of Catastrophe was out of his head, although that did not matter to our protagonist in the least because he told his little purple ball that he believed completely in him. Peepa, the little purple ball of evil, became so stressed that he told him that it was no longer about whether he could do it or not. That is, yes, our Catastrophe Lord was quite resistant since he had managed to survive despite attracting so much misfortune into his life with an incredible and ridiculous intensity. But, from that day on, according to the little purple ball of evil, if he had that part of bad luck that he had scattered on the girl again, our Lord of Catastrophe would see his bad luck become something quite different. Our Lord of Catastrophe reminded him of the little purple ball of evil that he had lived with that bad luck for 10 years of his life. In addition, in the last decade of his existence nobody had beaten him and he was not going to lose that streak in a long, long time. His little purple ball of evil let him know that it is not because he was belittling him or ruining his speech. The thing was that, since he had come into his life, the variables that affected his bad luck instead of being one, were now two. Our Lord of the Catastrophe demanded to know what he was talking about, to which his little purple ball of evil replied that yes, the human bad luck that was of our Lord of the Catastrophe, and the bad spiritual luck that was of the purple ball of evil. According to the purple ball, once recovered, those two types of bad luck that were previously not at all related will begin to affect each other. So when that happened, our Lord of Catastrophe would not only face the mortal dangers to which he was accustomed, but also a host of beings from another world. Our Lord of the Catastrophe, nervous and annoyed, asked Peepa if that meant that thanks to that, he could attract other evil spirits into his life, to which the little purple ball of evil explained that it was not precisely that. That meant that if something went wrong, both could end up losing their ability to transfer bad luck, so that's why it was not convenient for them to risk everything and so much for a simple unknown girl. Peepa, understanding where the thoughts of our Lord of the Catastrophe were going, told him that they were connected by telepathy. Therefore, he understood where his thoughts were going. Yes, it could be that she was not hated by him, but they transferred bad luck so that both Peepa and our Catastrophe Lord protected themselves. So as long as they achieved their goals, why should they care about someone other than themselves? Our Lord of the Catastrophe continued walking in silence to the infirmary, thinking about everything. While Peepa could no longer bear that silence, so he demanded an answer from our Lord of the Catastrophe. The boy asked him to leave it there. He was not going to touch Peepa again to recover his bad luck, but that bad luck was previously his, so he could beat it himself even if he did not have his purple ball of evil. Peepa, irritated, asked him if he was always so bored that he would go looking for problems all the blessed time, to which our Lord of the Catastrophe sent him to fry asparagus, because if they did not recover the bad luck, Peepa could do what he wanted. Overall, our Lord of Catastrophe had never asked for his opinion. Peepa suggested that he should have more respect for him since he was a spirit big enough and evil enough to kill him. Before our Catastrophe Lord responded, Maki took a photo from the height where she was, quietly saying that she had come up with a rather funny idea. In that, he saw his technological device and the photo he had taken of the girl who was on the back of our protagonist had been perfect. That means, would Maki's new plan come with an even bigger wave of bad luck?